Our discussion is now on Gold Industry Declaration of Sustainability Principles. To chair the session, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. John Mulligan, the Director of Market Relations and Climate Change Lead for World Gold Council. Joining him in this discussion shall be Ms. Sakhila Mirza, ED for WGC. We've already met her yesterday once. Lovely to have you back on the stage. And of course, one of our most elegant recipients, prize recipients yesterday, Mr. Albert Cheng, the CEO of SBMA, who yesterday received an IGC honor in an individual capacity. Let's make some noise for all these people. Let me tell you a bit about Mr. John Mulligan. He leads the WGC's Climate Change Research Program and is associated with engaging investors and policymakers and stakeholder organizations. Additionally, he contributes to organizations' wider communications and outputs to improve understanding of the whole gold supply chain. He joined WGC in early 2005 and has a degree from University of Sussex and Birkbeck College, University of London. You already know Ms. Sakhila's profile. She was introduced in detail yesterday. Talking about Mr. Albert Cheng, he joined the World Gold Council in March 1993 as a regional manager, became the MD Far East in 2003, retired in March 2015, and he began gold marketing back in July 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, he was appointed the honorary CEO of SBMA in November 2015. Please put your hands up as I leave this session in the hands of Mr. Mulligan.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's my first time as an adult in this city, so I'm really pleased to be invited. And thanks for this opportunity to discuss, I think, a fairly significant initiative. David's already introduced it, but it's something I think which is quite key in possibly advancing the sustainability credentials of the whole global gold industry. Now, thank you for that introduction. I've been at the Gold Council for nearly 20 years, and I always mention my own personal journey. I won't bore you with it just now, but I think it's significant because I started in investment. But in the last decade, I moved towards considering broader sustainability issues, and I think that represents, in some ways, how society is viewing assets and products. Basically, the issue of how sustainability, how wider value and impact affects how you view a product or asset. So before I join my good friends on stage, I am going to introduce a few slides just to explain what the Declaration of Principles actually is. So let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. I here talk about a sectoral sustainability journey. And what that really means is there's been an awful lot of progress along the gold supply chain in terms of the top of that pyramid that you see before you. We already have quite a lot of ways of demonstrating and indicating our performance standards. In some ways, what we've done is we've started at the top, but we haven't addressed the base. So we have basically moved towards, for instance, in mining, we have the responsible gold mining principles. In refining, you have the responsible gold guidance. In jewelry, you've got the code of practice from the RJC, etc. What we haven't done actually is agree some basic principles. And that has led, in some ways, to some of the fragmentation, even in addressing these objectives that David alluded to. So what we need to do, perhaps, is to return to the basis, return to the foundations. And that's what this first slide says. We may have started to address the top of the pyramid, but we haven't actually built foundations. So what we need to do is say, what exactly does sustainability mean to the different players across the global gold supply chain? And can we agree on our goals and impacts as a collective, as a whole industry? Now, as I say, some ways we've done this in reverse. We have made great progress, we've made great ability, and in some ways the gold industry is ahead of the curve in many aspects. But we need to say, when we've started to implement standards, when we've started to move towards certification, do all of these things broadly align? Do they cover all the relevant key areas and challenges? And quite importantly, over the last half decade, I'd say, is do they match or reflect societal and consumer expectations? So these are the questions we sought to ask, and we started doing this, I think, nearly 18 months ago now. Last March, we started, when we were talking with the LBMA and getting together with the industry, we said, instead of just having a talking shop, let's try and bring the industry together with a working group to agree what we mean in terms of value-based commitments. What did we agree to? Well, we agreed to the details you see on screen, and I'm fully aware that you can't read any of those. The print is too small. So let me try and simplify. There we go. The 10 principles that over a period of negotiation with a very broad set of stakeholders, I think the working group to arrive at these included at least 80 or more individuals from dozens of organizations across the world. What was material to each of them? And bringing them together to say, okay, well, these are the things of which we need to be mindful of, first of all, we need to be aware of, and then we need to be able to demonstrate progress on. These are the organizations that then signed. David mentioned coming together, 14 organizations and exchanges representing a very, very broad set of stakeholders. And I think, as I say, I've been working in the World Gold Council and therefore the gold market for nearly 20 years. This was the first time in my experience where you had such a broad set of market participants come together and agree to move forward as a collective. And I think that's what's important, and that's what I hope to discuss with my colleagues today. So that's the framework. That's what we've kind of agreed in terms of both content and who the participants are. We're always open to broadening that set. We're in discussions with a few organizations who are interested in joining. As I say, now the question is, what do we do moving forward? So that's hopefully set the context. You've already heard a fair bit from me, so hopefully now you can hear from Sakhila, who's Executive Director and General Counsel at the LBMA, not a WGC executive, and you all know Albert. Let's see if this works. It does. So as I say, it's my great pleasure to be joined by Sakhila and Albert. Albert recently stepped forward to also chair the signatories group. So the signatories group is those 14 organizations. And although David mentioned we will be meeting together tomorrow, we do meet on a quarterly basis to try and discuss what it will mean to advance these principles. I've spoken quite a lot, so I'm going to ask some questions and hopefully you guys can join in. I want this to be as informal as possible, so please, if you want to answer other questions or we have other issues on your mind, please do so. But I have a hypothesis. That markets, companies, brands now need to move beyond just what I would call sanitizing their supply chains, and that's important in and of itself, that they need to move towards demonstrating value and purpose. And when we talk about gold and both in jewelry form, but also as an investment, it's largely seen as a discretionary purchase. And that means there's a choice, and that trust therefore becomes key. So we need to start to think about, okay, if it's discretionary, how does it position itself in the world in terms of value and purpose? First of all, do you agree with me? That's my hypothesis. It may not be how everybody sees it. And if you do, how do you think the declaration might contribute to progress? I'll throw that open to you, Sakhila, first.
Well, before I answer your question, John, I'm sure I'm not out of line to actually thank you personally, but on behalf of all these organizations for actually bringing us together and especially holding the pen. That was a mammoth task. And I know when we started back in March 2022, John and I started speaking and we wanted to get it done by the Lisbon conference in October. I was perhaps I was more skeptical. And I thought, John, I just don't think we're going to get this done by October. And actually, John, you held the pen and you got it done for us. So thank you. And I'm sure everybody else, I can speak for on your behalf as well in thanking John. Now, in answering your question, this was necessary. This has been important for the industry to come together, but also understand the definition of sustainability. It's a word that is used all too often It's quite an easy word to use, but it's a difficult word to understand. So what does sustainability actually mean? How does it apply? How do we actually meet the objectives of making sure we have a sustainable market? And again, I've used the word a few times now, very easily used, but difficult to actually understand. And by coming together, was it the 10 principles? Yeah, 10 principles. We've actually collectively been able to define what sustainability means. And we've kept the definition reasonably broad. So this is to your point, to allow for a little bit of discretion because each market is different and we have to respect the uniqueness of every market, the unique characteristics that each market has. So when we are adopting the 10 principles, we can do that in a tailored, in a measured way. But then equally understanding it is a global market, there has to be some consistency. So if we're all using the right priorities and the same priorities, then at least we're working towards a common goal. So a common goal with some discretion in how you apply it that is fit for your market. And I think that's an important message there. It is not about just because the LBMA does it in a specific way that the SBMA has to do it in exactly the same way. Yes, we agree the principles, but then there's some discretion in how we actually implement it and roll it out. Obviously, you've heard me speak at many conferences at the India Gold Conference. I've forgotten what number this is for me, maybe 7. And I've always spoken about responsible sourcing. I've always mentioned it. It's come up time and time again. And I've spent perhaps 6 of those conferences defining what responsible sourcing is. This is the first conference, and perhaps my favorite conference so far, where I've actually heard the word responsible sourcing being used by every single panelist, or at least in every single panel session. It's no longer a case of just the LBMA talking about it, World Gold Council, SBMA, or other associations, but to hear it being used and defined by the private sector, by government organizations, and by the regulators as a concept, as a practice that is absolutely essential. The panel that we had this morning, and they spoke about traceability. They spoke about track and trace. Where is the gold coming from? Where is the gold going? It was a common reoccurring theme that I've actually heard in other panelists over the last day and a bit. So again, the first objective there is being met. We're all actually looking at what it means to our respective industries. But it's a huge journey when it comes to sustainability. And as you've seen, there's another 9 principles that we need to come together on. Bit of a long answer, John, but I hope it made some sense.
Thanks. And that's I think it's a really good point. It's the point I mentioned about moving beyond sanitizing your supply chains, and that sounds like a critical term. It isn't. What I mean by that is we spent a lot of time on responsible sourcing. I think we made huge progress, but the question then becomes, okay, how do we interact or how do we engage on what I might call these other externalities? Albert, from your perspective, and this is not just, shall I say, this is not just a World Gold Council LBMA initiative. It is now a group initiative.
Indeed. I first of all, on behalf of the SBMA, I'd like to thank the World Gold Council LBMA inviting us, the rest of the signatory group, to this initiative, which I think is very important for the survival of our industry going forward, as the world is putting a lot of attention to the environment, social, and governance issue, which kind of everyone is looking at it, interpret it in different ways. So with 2 global organizations coming together, leading the way, and we, SBMA as a regional trade association, we have people who have embarked on the journey in different stages. I think with some guidance, parameters, and directions that being set by the industry group will be very much actually appreciated by the stakeholder, and particularly in our region. And all of you know that, speaking from the Singapore perspective, Singapore is a very small city-state, and what we do is not just looking at this small little area and the little population. What we do is to do something which has a bigger vision, taking the whole world as a hinterland, as the founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, say, we, although it's a small city, but we have big ambition. And we take on the role of having the world as our hinterland and and Singapore is facilitating global initiative through our efficient infrastructure and our governance systems. So likewise, Singapore is always in the precious metal field a leader, and we lead in many initiatives of the precious metal ecosystem. We don't have the rock and we don't have the rain, but we have the bulk of the middle and upper stream of the gold ecosystem, meaning that we have a lot of international bullion bank, we have a lot of bullion trader, we have exchanges, and we have other related services, including security, transport, storage facility, fintech service provider, and all those people, and even, all the so-called market development agency have presence in Singapore. So we are always looked towards by our 10 ASEAN neighbor to look at Singapore as a way to connect to the world. And SBMA is rightly now being a connector, is playing a connector role. So our participation in this initiative and being part of the signatory group has been fully discussed internally with our members, and they all endorse, and we are moving together. And thanks for the panel. I'm currently the chair of this signatory group, and we have a meeting tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert. You both alluded to the fact that on the sustainability journey I started, I kind of sketched out at the top of the presentation that we're all on different parts of that journey, and we're all collective organizations, which means we have members who are also on different parts of that journey. I guess the question is, how do we break down the silos? How do we encourage or support that moving together we mentioned? Because we can't all be doing the same thing at the same time. We know that. And there are some things that are more material to our businesses, different parts of it than others. So how do we make sure that we're all aligned, accepting that we're on different stages of that journey? Do you want to start, Albert?
SBMA is a regional trade association, and we started our journey as a more socialized body than a professional body. It's only in the last 8 to 10 years that we professionalize ourselves and we take on more so-called agenda which related to the industry. We grow from our size from 25 members to now 68 members, and which cover quite a big geography. Not only Singapore, we have members in the regions. So I think one thing I saw the growth of this association is, although we are competitors, each one of them are competitors, but when we sit down together to discuss issues related to the industry, we always are thinking the same thing for the good of the industry and for moving Singapore as well as ASEAN as an important precious metal trading center. And this has been times after time discussed among our members, particularly the management committee. SBMA is not run by a specific person. It's run by the management committee. We meet actually every month. And this every month, not only a 1-hour meeting, it go into drinks and dinner. Imagine the kind of interaction we have during drinks and dinner is where we build up our rapport and build up our trust among each members. Of course, we will not discuss trade formation, but we generally talk about issues that related to us. I think that is the way how we gel ourselves together. And on particular issue, we actually put together effort to talk to the government. And we also, in order to make Singapore important in the regional, in the regional market, we actually collectively go to other jurisdictions, like going to Vietnam, going to Thailand, and going to Indonesia, talking to the regulator there, and bring them to understand what we have done in Singapore in the past decades, and how much they can use us, learn from us, and how much our members can actually work with them and help them to develop their market. And likewise, for this kind of major industry principle, is the way that I think we'll use the same channel to disseminate the thing that we believe that it should be the right thing to do, but through the interaction among members and among the so-called regional forum and the regional activity in ASEAN, we disseminate what we think and we try to influence them as well. So we are looking at it as a holistic ASEAN level together with our membership base.
Thanks. Sakhila, I was thinking, obviously, the same question to you. And I know we participated on a panel on this quite recently, and I mentioned or asked you to comment on it, perhaps with some reflections on how it also is affecting the evolution of the responsible goal guidance.
So can I firstly answer your first question, just say everything he said? But I mean, just to emphasize the points that Albert has made. Absolutely, we're an international organization, as most of you know, and we also have members who are competitors, 100 good delivery list refiners, and they're all competitors. But the one goal that keeps everybody united is the focus around market integrity. That there is no disputing market integrity and the absolute fundamental goal of making sure that we protect this market and obviously make sure it's sustainable. So that common goal allows us to then work on sort of mutual projects, and the Sustainability Declaration is definitely one of them. And this is where transparency and communication helps. There's no point in having a shared goal if you're not communicating in terms of how you're actually looking to implement that shared goal or achieve those shared goals. Transparency is then needed to actually explain how we're sort of moving as a market, because we amongst each other can have those discussions, but if we're not explaining it to the end user, to the consumers about what we're doing, whether we're upstream, the refiner levels, or even in terms of the bullion banks, what is the point of all that good work? So providing transparency, effective communications, but like I said, making sure we have a common goal there. And another point which David mentioned in his speech earlier, but I also spoke about yesterday, was technology. Technology is going to be an enabler to allow us to actually achieve some fundamental objectives here. We've heard a lot about in terms of, I know there's some people in the room who've got a lot of good ideas and solutions. We've heard the term blockchain. We've heard various other ideas around, AI and various other types of technologies. I'm not a technology expert and I don't sort of claim to be one, but we know that technology can help. It can definitely help with understanding, as we learned last year, of where is the gold coming from, that provenance. Absolutely key to market integrity. And without that technology, perhaps those challenges won't be easily addressed. So technology as an enabler to facilitate this common shared goal is absolutely key in success here. Now, in terms of responsible sourcing, our program has grown over the last 10 years. We started in 2012, and in 2022, we launched version 9. And where we started, our first version was something like 15, 16 pages. That then grew to 20 pages, and now we're at 40 pages. And that's not because we increased the font size. That's because we actually increased the requirements. There's a lot more focus on more information, more data, more transparency. And this is not going to stop. Version 9, even before I launched version 9, I was very clear that there's going to be a version 10. And actually, people have started talking about a version 10 long before we even launched it, launched version 9. What's it going to include? What would it address? How is it going to be different from the current version? And my answer to that is, we have to pause. We have to reflect on lessons learned. We have to understand what has worked well in version 9, what is missing, What is it that the regulators would like to see? What is it that the downstream would like to see? And what is it that other stakeholders like civil society, people on the ground, what is it that they would like to see that the current version doesn't address? Once we understand that feedback, once we understand the impact of the existing version, it's only then can we scope the next. So it's never a case of why I always say that there's always going to be a new version. It's never defined until the current one is implemented to understand the lessons learned. So it's growing, and the idea is next year we're going to start scoping in terms of what are those lessons learned, but also speaking to government, speaking to those stakeholders, and getting their input before we move forward with the next iteration of responsible gold guidance.
Thank you. And both of you have mentioned in different ways the engagement with governments and regulators. And another one of my, I'll say hypotheses, but actually there's plenty of research to back me up, so I can be a bit more confident, is that consumers are frequently now expecting products, brands, and companies to be as impactful, to be as proactive as they used to rely on governments. And in my own specialization of climate change, it's the actual institutional investment community who actually drove the agenda, and all the governments are catching up. How do you see that interaction with stakeholders, governments? You've alluded to it, but how do you see it driving some of these issues? And specifically, which issues might be dependent on third-party support, government support? Some of these, clearly, none of these things can be addressed. None of these principles can be addressed by any one entity alone. So how do you see your engagement with that wider kind of ecosystem, regulatory, government, etc.? Albert, you alluded to your conversations in Singapore with the government. You mentioned you might be now addressing some of these issues. How do you see those conversations evolving? And I put them on the spot there. We haven't prepared this, so apologies.
Well, I guess the framework for this major issue is not something that has been fully discussed. I mean, we are looking at the framework that being framed in this principle and how to continue to carry in a more detailed way. I think one thing which I saw that to give some example of what we have already done is it will be grounded this in the more understandable way. I mean, very often when we heard about the big word sustainability and responsible sourcing, it is a very big word that sometimes what is it related to me? Particularly a small little refiner. I mean, not the LBMA type, the small. We have quite a lot of small refiner in our region. So what am I doing here will combine with this big principle. I think, particularly from the World Council and LBMA perspective, I heard about Sakhila yesterday say, we LBMA also need to demonstrate how we follow those. I think to start from things like that will be a meaningful way to start the journey with some name, big name, a brand that or people know about what they do and how they carry out this is a very good way to disseminate to a lower end or the lower end of the ecosystem. And I think with Sakhila yesterday talk about LBMA should do that. Maybe SBMA, we also need to either the SBMA ourselves or a few of the key members actually put out some of the very easier to understand example and try to disseminate it to our other people. I think that could be a beginning of the journey. Thank you.
From at least our perspective, one of the key sort of focus with governments and regulators has been the need for education. What is it that we're asking them? What is it that we're proposing? But actually, do they even understand the ask and do they even understand the proposal? So educating them in terms of how the international market works, And then obviously, more specifically in India, educating the government and the regulators in terms of how the Indian market works and how that sits with the international market is absolutely key. So education and the message that we would like to deliver to them cannot be heard enough times. The LBMA wrote to 10 governments back in 2020. And in this letter, we highlighted the work that the LBMA has done over the last several years. But actually, the work that we have done is not enough. But we are struggling, and this is where we would like some help. So the point that you've already made, John, is we can't do this single-handedly, and we're not actually saying we are doing this single-handedly. We've already heard it again today in terms of collaboration, working together, because that one voice is certainly stronger than actually it all being fractured. So joining up, I know we've been working on a few initiatives with you guys, as you know, John, in terms of speaking to the regulator together. Having that one voice, but having representing different parts of the supply chain is absolutely important. Doing this in silos is not going to be as effective. So we started with that letter. We met with various governments. We joined up on efforts where it was necessary in certain parts of the world. And we focused on educating and explaining what it is that we would ideally require, what it is that we have done, and what is it that the government needs to see from us to help them make some policy decisions. And that at least has been helpful. It's not done. I mean, you could almost say that the journey has only just started. But actually, there's a model that has been developed, which has been effective, at least on some of the work and initiatives that we've been focusing on. And like I said, it's the beginning, and a lot more still needs to be done. But at least having those relationships, having those contacts has made this a lot easier than perhaps what it was prior to 2020.
Thank you. And one of the things I think we'll be discussing in the signatories meeting tomorrow is how to position the declaration in the world. One, to tell some of those success stories. I mean, I think often the industry, as I say, has made great progress. It hasn't always communicated that progress to the outside world in a coherent way. So the declaration is allowing us to bring together those various initiatives, demonstrate progress. And one of the things we'll be talking about, and I'll be asking those signatories in the room to bring to the table, is that evidence, the proof points of success and progress. If we can bring it together, it'll make hopefully all of our jobs easier in engaging with stakeholders. So that's kind of, it's a statement rather than a question, but that's kind of one of the functions or benefits of, I think, the declaration.
Yes, I think, I mean, that is a starting point, and I think this needs to be disseminated to the wider Purses Medal audience. And I think one of the plans is to have a website which will have the updated information, as well as through the signatory group website, we are going to disseminate this. I think this is the beginning of the journey, and what can be done going forward, I think the group collectively will decide on the next stage. That's my opinion.
I mean, I absolutely agree, but I can also add to that in terms of the LBMA and what we've done with the declaration. We're launching our 3-year sustainability strategy later this year. I briefly mentioned it yesterday. There are 5 buckets, and we're reflecting all 10 principles through that strategy with highlighting how we're going to implement and achieve some of the goals that we've set out. There are some targets built in. There are some deliverables, very focused outcomes. But what we perhaps haven't actually articulated, but we will do once we've launched the strategy, is the engagement with all the different stakeholders that we're going to need to have in place to be able to deliver on our 3-year strategy. So I would strongly urge for everybody in the room to actually look at it, criticize it. I won't take it personally. If there is something that doesn't make sense, or you think it's overambitious or not ambitious enough, tell us, because it's that feedback that will help us ensure that we're actually doing the right thing, we're being held accountable by the industry, and therefore delivering on the sustainability declaration that we've all signed up to.
John, one last word. I think this signatory group all have different special interests and also a more specific interest group behind them. But so, on behalf of our organization and maybe the rest of the signature group, I think the LBMA and the WGC, being a more global body, should continue to lead the discussion and bringing the signatory group forward This is a very important thing, and which I like to say it openly, that continuously WGC and LBMA need to lead this initiative and move it forward.
Thanks, Albert. I hope we all move forward because I think as a group we're stronger. We are definitely committed to facilitating and driving progress. So thank you. I think we're probably just out of time. We are around, or certainly I can speak for all of us, hopefully, we're around. This is a cross-industry initiative, so all of the industry have inputs potentially. Please come along and talk to us and monitor our progress, because the feedback, the interaction, engagement is very significant. So thank you. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, again, the hosts, and thank you. I think there's going to be an announcement.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Mulligan. Let's give them a round of applause, everyone.